Talks, and we got some exciting news at the end of that trailer. And on top of that, there's always so much to talk about with the Dresden Files. So let's get right to it and roll that intro. Okay, so as you see from the back, it's all about Harry Dresden tonight. All about Harry Dresden. So hopefully we get some people who are fans of the Dresden Files out here tonight to chat about this and do our thing and have a conversation here in the time of self-quarantining and social distancing. So before we even get started, the first thing that I should tell you is we can have you join us by Skype if you want. All you need to do is hit that link down at the bottom of your screen underneath in the comment section where you have the description of this video. You can go ahead and hit there and we'll go ahead and Skype you in. You can talk to us in real time. Of course, you can always add a comment over in the comment section. That'll pop up for me. I'll throw it up on the screen. We can talk about it. But if you want to talk in real time, Skype is the way to go. So, Harry Dresden. If you haven't read the Dresden Files, we'll try not to be too spoilery tonight, but I don't know, people get really excited about it. I don't like to be apologetic here on the channel. We have lots of different booktubing channels and lots of different places and lots of different reviewers with lots of different styles. But here we talk about books, and we talk about books from book lovers like myself, with book lovers like yourself, and we have a discussion, or at least that's the whole idea, is to have a discussion. And it is my hope that we can share our love of certain series, talk about certain series. So if you haven't read the books, beware. There may be spoilers ahead, but we'll try and keep a lid on those spoilers for you. All right, we got somebody up here. Let's see. Hi, it's my mother. So, hi, Mom. Let's go ahead. Can we put you in there? I don't know how we get that going, but I do see that you're on Facebook. And, you know, just so that everybody can say, hi, Mom. Hi, Mom. Thanks for coming in. I know I had people talking on the East Coast about how they would prefer that I tried to make these streams a little bit earlier so that people were able to participate, you know, on the other side of the country. So, Mom, glad you were here. Glad you could show up. It's always nice to have Mom support. So, yes, the trailer. Wow, the trailer for Peace Talks. It was not exactly what I had expected. The vibe was a little bit different than perhaps the vibe that most of us associate with Harry Dresden. I mean, Harry Dresden is not a paranormal romance series. It's not Sherilyn Kenyon. It's not Laurel K. Hamilton. It's not one of those really sexed up series, which do sort of pervade the urban fantasy genre a little bit. The Dresden Files is much more, I don't want to just say it's character driven, because they're all character driven, although the Dresden Files very much is. But it's, you could probably count on one hand. Maybe you need part of another hand to count the number of sex scenes that are really prevalent in the Dresden Files. Now, sure, there is an undercurrent of sexuality and sensuality in sort of the paranormal detective genre, in kind of that noir way that that Jim goes about writing the series. But I wouldn't say it's generally sexed up for no good reason, and I certainly wouldn't refer to them as romances. However, the trailer was interesting. It felt very sexualized. It felt a lot more like a trailer for maybe a Sherilyn Kenyon, maybe a Laurel K. Hamilton, than I would have expected for a Harry Dresden novel. But hey, you know, whatever twirls your beanie. I'm not against the sexualizing of the characters, but I was taken aback a little bit by it. Some shocking developments in terms of where the story is going, which was new. Some payoffs where I think there's going to be a good bit of fan service. I'm trying not to be too much of a spoiler for you here, in case you haven't read the series. And since we're not deep into the discussion yet, if you haven't read Harry Dresden, it's almost defying of description, because it is kind of a genre solidifying series. I recall I had run out of books. This was way back before any of the Harry Dresdens were being released on hardcover. And it was still under the ROC label, ROC label. And, I was looking for something else to read, and there was a tagline that said Harry Potter meets Christopher Marlowe, and I said, was it Christopher Philip Marlowe? I'm sorry, I'm all Shakespeare in the head. Christopher Marlowe. Wow. We'll talk about Christopher Marlowe another time. But meets Philip Marlowe. So Harry Potter meets Philip Marlowe, a sort of a detective novel kind of thing, with Chicago's only wizard who advertises in the phone book. And that initially I was like, you know what, this book looks a little short. It's a paperback. It shouldn't take too long to read. Might as well give it a shot. And even from the first book, which is Stormfront, which is by most accounts kind of one of the weaker entries into the series overall. I was kind of hooked. I needed to know where it was going to go. I wanted to know where it was going to go. So, next came Full Moon, and then, after that, I always forget it, whether it's Death Mass or I think it's Death Mass that comes after that one. And by then we're off to the races. And a lot of people talk about the Dresden Files, and when they do, one of their criticisms is that it's kind of a slow burn to get started. But I know from various interviews and in various articles and responses that Jim Butcher has given, he had kind of outlined the whole series when he started. So I think that slow burn is kind of to bring us into the world at a pace that we can sort of go along with it. And you really do. If you're starting the Dresden Files for the first time, I would say give yourself the first 3 to 4 novels before you put it down. And they're all good. This is not to say in any way that they're not all good entries. And yes, they do sort of have the case of the week concept at the beginning when we're dealing with the first few novels. There is, so an overarching story arc that goes over the entire series, but that gets sort of revealed a little bit at a time, and it's hard to know right away that's where we're going to go. So we sort of start with a Monster of the Week formula, and then we move very rapidly, and by very rapidly I mean over the first few books, into the real clear concept that there is a story at play, that every entry into the series is a link in that chain that we're moving forward. One of the things that we talk about in writing, and forgive me, my voice is a little bit iffy. Drink some tea here. One of the things that we talk about often in writing, and we talk about this novel by novel, but we also talk about this in terms of a story arc that's designed to go over multiple novels. We talk about the breadcrumbs, and did the author leave the breadcrumbs along the way, or did it feel like they were just kind of pulling stuff out of their pockets, and things just sort of happened that didn't seem to be grounded in a plan or in intentionality. And it's really clear with the Dresden Files as you move through. It's very clear that there is intentionality the whole way through. Now, this is not to say that it's like a Robert Jordan-esque concept or a Wheel of Time concept where you'll have a character that shows up maybe in the fourth book, and it's hard to realize at that time that at the end of the day, 6 books later, this character that had sort of a walk-on role in book 3 comes into book 7 and suddenly is an integral character, and you wonder how you missed the fact that they could possibly be there. And as much as I love and respect Robert Jordan's work in The Wheel of Time in particular, sometimes I kind of feel like, ooh, I need a character, I can recycle one. Sometimes it feels like he's recycling minor characters to put them into larger roles, almost as if he just didn't want to have to pay a new actor. I don't know, but it happens that way with Robert Jordan sometimes. With Jim Butcher, particularly in the Dresden Files, because that's what we're talking about this evening. So particularly with Jim Butcher, it seems more like when a character has an extra role or a walk-on role or a minor role for a while, you kind of can tell by the time you get midway through the series as it exists now, the first 15 or so books, you start to realize that every character who had a speaking role, let's say, a featured extra role, had some importance along the way. He knew where he was going. Now, did he know the details of every single thing that's going to happen? I think it would be ridiculous to say that he does. And I know that he doesn't, having heard from interview after interview that he has a general idea of how things are going to go. But as a writer, and this is one of the best pieces of advice I ever heard as a writer, is you create characters and you create them fully enough to give them enough reality, to give them enough life to surprise you. And it's a wonderful thing when your characters do surprise you. And I would imagine that that Jim is surprised on a fairly regular basis by Harry and the mess sometimes that Harry gets into, even on top of the mess that Jim had perhaps planned for Harry when he sat down to work on the novels. So once again, I do want to tell you before we kind of move on into our big news for the evening, and I ask your thoughts on them. I do want to mention again that if you use this address up here, you can Skype in. Just go ahead, get onto Skype, enter that room, and I can bring you into the live stream with us so that we can have a real-time conversation, and you get to be featured on the Inkstain channel. Yay. But on top of that, it's easier to talk in real time if you do Skype. But if you want to comment, please do. Please comment, and we can turn this rant of mine into more of a conversation. So getting back to what I was saying about your character surprising you, it happens a lot for character-driven authors that they'll have a plan, and then they'll be chugging along, and then something will happen that's just too good to ignore, and you find yourself kind of dropping some of the plan a little bit. You don't drop the where your destination is, because that would just be silly. But how you get to the destination may take some twists and turns that you didn't necessarily expect it to take. And then as we go through the process of writing, or at least as I've been taught to go through the process of writing, and most writers that I know, go through this experience, you find yourselves taking those divergent paths. And then when you go to do your next draft, because we go through a drafting process, so when you go to do the next draft, then you have to sort of build in the breadcrumbs, as I mentioned before. You then sort of have to build in the breadcrumbs to make sure that you have a solid line from point A to point B to point C, and ultimately where you're going to end up, at the end of your story. One of the great things about the Dresden Files is, although you do read them in order, is the best way to go. There are a number of short stories. If you look behind me, you'll see a whole bunch of book covers, and that's kind of a theme that I use here for my backdrop. That we have book covers from the author that we're talking about that in that video. Now, I'm doing a lot of live streaming right now because rather than creating a video and then going back and editing it, although I do have some of those on various channels, but I like the live stream thing right now because we're also isolated, and I want to be able to talk with you all and interact and share some community with you. Share some fellowship with you in these trying times. But if you look back behind me, and I think I'm pointing at one right here, sort of Mean Streets, I think it is. Jim Butcher has short story collections. He also has a number of short stories that appear in those collections, have appeared in collections that other authors have edited. So he very often will have a short story from the point of view of a character that is not Harry Dresden. Now, Harry normally is written in the first person, and so we get Harry's point of view. But there have been some wonderful, wonderful stories that Jim has written that sort of illuminate his world and his world building because they look at Harry through other people's eyes. There's a wonderful, wonderful story. I think it's in Side Jobs, and you don't want to read this one probably until you get book 13-ish. But this story is from another character's point of view, and it really gives us some incredible information about how other people see Harry as opposed to how Harry sees himself. And that journey that we take looking at Harry from the outside is really quite fascinating and shows us just what a fantastic writer Jim Butcher is in many senses, but in this example, in the sense that he really knows not just how his character sees himself, how his character sees the world, but also how the world sees his protagonist. And how looking at him through that lens, after having read, I think it's 13 books or 14 books with the character, from Harry's point of view, it adds a whole other spin when you look at it from the outside, look at Harry from another character's point of view, and then you reflect on the rest of the series that you've read so far through that additional point of view, through that lens of that other character. It almost makes you want to go back and reread the whole story now from Stormfront all the way back through wherever you get to the point where you read the stories in Side Jobs and get to that story where we see Harry through somebody else's eyes. Because it makes you look at the whole thing absolutely differently. And that is the mark of a fantastic writer. When you look at the whole thing differently just because of one little tweak in the world building. So, I mean, it is that deep. And when you first start to read the Dresden Files, you will initially consider it to be kind of fluffy, probably. It does not seem particularly deep. It is extremely entertaining. Jim has been quoted over and over as saying that he sees his job first and foremost to entertain his readers, and as writers, we should all see that as our primary job. But they're very entertaining, and they're insular, and they kind of seem like one-offs, even though they're not. And they're not difficult reading. They're easy to read. That's not to say that they are low bar or childish or immature in any way. It's just that Jim understands that there are people who, well, most people in the world have a fairly limited vocabulary. So if you work within that framework, the reading is pretty easy. And Harry is a very plain-spoken individual. So reading things through Harry's point of view goes by very quickly. I would also highly recommend, and I know that not everybody is an audiobook person. I happen to be both an avid reader and an audiobook person. And in fact, when Jim Butcher puts out a new book, what I wind up doing is giving him a lot of my money, because I'll get the audiobook, I'll get the hardcover, and then I'll also get it digitally, because I want the hardcover for my shelf. I'll usually read off of my Kindle, but I can't read while driving, so I'll utilize Audible. Whisper syncs the voice with the page that I'm reading, and I just sort of continually go through the journey of that book through multiple platforms the day the book comes out. That's how good they are. I don't wait. I mean, I've got Peace Talks already pre-ordered, and it'll arrive the day that the book gets out, and the audiobook will come the day that it gets out, and we'll go along that journey. So it's a fascinating journey it is. So one of the great things about the audiobooks, first of all, they're read by James Marsters. Many of you may know him from a number of things, but predominantly he played Spike in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and then the spin-off series, Angel, and then his own series, Spike, which was somewhat short-lived. But James Marsters reads it, and you get to the point where he has it. He just gets it. So his voice sort of becomes synonymous in your head with Harry's voice and Harry's narrative voice. So it gets to the point where once you've kind of read the books, once you've kind of read the series, you're going to want to revisit them. And that's one of the reasons why on the thumbnail for this, I'd mentioned that Harry is kind of the best and most screwed up friend that you never realized you needed, and that you never realized had been there all along. Harry is a friend. Harry gets into your soul, and you will always say to yourself after you've read the Dresden Files, oh, I wish I had these people in my life so that I could tell them this thing that I know he would appreciate if he saw it. I mean, that's how well the characters are defined. And when you revisit the books, and what I normally do is I'll read them first, and then almost immediately I wind up going and listening to the audio almost as soon as I finish the first book. If you've had that experience, please let the rest of everybody know in the comments. But I'll almost immediately go back and listen to the audio. So it is a really, really fantastic way to re-experience the books. And I do this with the Wheel of Time series also, because it gets to the point where you just can't sit there and read all of that stuff as quickly as you'd like to, and not miss things. And when you hear things read aloud, you often catch things that you may have skimmed over when you read, because it's a different sensory input. But every time a new book comes out, as many of you do, I'm sure, I wind up going back, listening to all of the audiobooks, hoping to time it right so that I can be ready to go on the new book as soon as it comes out. Many people read the books with that possibility in mind as well. But I tend to listen to them when I revisit them. And particularly over the summers and whatever, I'm a road trip kind of person. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks. And I listen to a lot of books when driving long distances. And as I go, it's an interesting experience. Not to jump off the Dresden Files, but to jump off the Dresden Files. I remember a couple summers ago, I drove from Las Vegas, which is where I live, all the way to Miami, which is where I grew up and where much of my family is. And I was listening to the Dark Tower series, Stephen King's Dark Tower series. I was revisiting that. And I remember it kind of compelled me to keep driving, because when you get through an entire novel, like Harry Dresden, like anything by Stephen King, like The Wheel of Time, and there are a number, like Brandon Sanderson, Stormlight Archive, or Mistborn, and you experience them virtually in one sitting, because you don't have to give your eyes a rest so much because you are driving. Excuse me. Because you are driving, it takes on this whole otherworldly, different experience that you have, because you can really immerse yourself into it. So I tend to listen to them very rapidly. When you consider, if you're driving from say Vegas to Miami, it's going to be 45 hours. That is even longer than, say, I don't know, most of the Dark Tower books. The Stand, however, if you listen to the audio of The Stand, that's 47 hours. So you can go all the way across the country while listening to The Stand audiobook and still have to finish the book either on the way back or while you're driving around your destination. That's how long the book is. But if you are immersing yourself in it in that way, it is a truly, truly unique experience. So with the Dresden Files, I almost feel a sense of mourning when I finish my re-listen, and I'm about to start a re-listen again, because not only is Peace Talks coming out, but, and I cannot believe I'm blanking on this. So let me take a look here real quick, because I want to give you the accurate information. I just need to find it, so bear with me. And I had it a minute ago. Battleground. So this is the announcement that we had today. We had the trailer, which I would love to hear somebody else's comments on. And if you are watching this after we air live, please do comment. I'd love to hear what you think about the trailer, what your thoughts were, and also the announcement. So we knew that we were getting Peace Talks in July. So we were most of us, the Dresden fandom, were very excited about getting Peace Talks finally in July. But we got a special bonus surprise today at the end of the trailer, because not only are we getting Peace Talks in July, we are getting Battleground in September. So very rapidly, we're going to have two brand spanking new Harry Dresden novels coming at us in rapid succession, which, hey, the more Harry in my world, the better. Because as I talked about before, with Harry being a friend, or feeling like a friend, I feel a sense of mourning almost when I finish a reread, when I finish a re-listen, if I'm listening to the audiobooks, because you get to the end and you're like, wait a minute, I can't hang with my friends anymore, and you wind up with this conundrum, and it's a happy conundrum to be in as a reader, but I would imagine it's an even happier conundrum to have you in as an author, which is you get to the end of your reread or your re-listen, and you either are in mourning and kind of guilt yourself into saying, you know what, I need to include something else in my life except for this one series, or you just start all over again. And you just start all over again and read it again or listen to it again. And, I have done that, but I try to sort of expand my horizons with my reading a little bit. My sister, who hopefully will take a look at this, because she also is a Dresden fan. I will take credit for that. I'm just saying. But my sister is also a Dresden fan, and she, hopefully, she'll click into this live stream at some point, or watch it in a replay. But it's cray cray. I cannot believe I just said cray cray. But I work with middle school kids, so I don't really have a choice. We are getting to a point now, and specifically since Jim took a little while to get us peace talks. Now, authors have stuff that goes on in their lives, and life gets in the way, and Jim didn't pull a George R. Martin on us, nor did he pull a Pat Rothfuss on us, because we knew that the books were kind of on their way and in process, but it has been a longer period of time between Skin Game and Peace Talks than it normally is between Dresden Files novels, or if nothing else, between Jim Butcher novels. I mean, we've got Jim is an author who, Codex Alera is an epic fantasy series, which if you haven't read it is absolutely worth your time. The Codex Alera, which we'll talk about. We'll talk about in another video. There's Aeronaut's Windlass, which is sort of a cyberpunk kind of series, which we know that Jim has been working on the second book of that. So he's got a bunch of irons in the fire. He's also had some personal things, life changes, some illness, all of those things that sort of combine to delay the author's ability to really sit down and get cracking on the book. But he hasn't left us hanging as long as some have. Nonetheless, we've been waiting a bit, and the short stories that we've gotten sort of in the interim have served to really kind of whet our appetite for wanting to kind of get on with it and get on with the series. So we want to know what happens, because there are some machines, there are some mechanisms going underneath the primary plot, which will have major ramifications with regard to the primary plot, and you just gotta know how these things work and how these things will affect the overall story, because we know stuff that the other characters don't know, and will that information be revealed? Are we just going to know it and look at the rest of what's going on with the undercurrent of that information? Anything's possible when you're dealing with Jim. So, things may be overt, and we may come in and the rest of the characters already know what we know, and we don't really have the screen time where we see them find out the information, or maybe they don't know it at all, or, there's so many possibilities. And when you get 16 novels in to the series, you're bought in. You're bought in. And we will, of course, talk about the Wheel of Time here on Inkstein channel. So we'll talk about how it kind of sags a little bit around the middle. And one often wonders if the readers were not already invested, if they were not invested, till like 7 novels in or 8 novels in. And let's be clear, a Robert Jordan novel, in its largest, most tomey kind of state, is near twice as long as a Dresden novel, in its earliest iteration. So, much like Harry Potter, the books get longer as they go, and they don't get like Brandon Sanderson long yet. I say yet. It seems that we're getting 2 novels in the fall, well, in the summer and then in the fall, because the story needed to be broken up. That it had already been written, but that it had to be broken up into 2 separate books, because otherwise it may have been Brandon Sanderson long. I don't know. And I do wonder if in the future people will kind of look at the 2 novels that are coming out, Peace Talks, and I'm going to have to look at this again because I'm so not used to wondering about it. Here, this will be easier. Okay, you're in pre-order. There is no cover art, by the way, in case you were wondering. There is no cover art, and the book is Battleground, and there is no cover art for Battleground yet. But I do wonder if in the future people will look at Peace Talks and Battleground as kind of one long novel given to us in 2 installments, or if it will really look much more like 2 completely independent and separate novels. I have no way to know. I am not going to speculate at this point because that would be foolish. But it's exciting. It really is. It's exciting to me that we had sort of this Dresden drought. You can hashtag that, hashtag Dresden drought. Now we're going to sort of get this bounty kind of all at once. And it'll probably be just long enough, the bastard. It'll probably be just long enough that people will read Peace Talks. For me, I'll probably read Peace Talks, then I'll listen to Peace Talks. Then I may be inclined to listen to the whole thing again, and just in time for Battleground to show up, and then go through the whole thing again. So I'm expecting the summer and fall to be all about Dresden. Now, so let's talk just briefly about this channel. I do like to live stream. I do like to have conversations in as close to real time as possible. I do respond to comments, so it is my intention that as we move forward, I will respond to as many of your comments as humanly possible. But I've worked with little itty bitties, and I've worked with kids, and I got to tell you, bullying, any of that stuff, negativity, all of that crazy, you don't have to like what I say. You never have to like what I say, and I respect your right to not like what I have to say. But just meanness is not gonna be tolerated. So that's just not gonna happen. I also know that the booktube world it's big and yet small at the same time. There are lots and lots of booktubers. There are people who kind of review books, but what they mostly do, what I find a lot of booktubers do, and I really don't mean to piss anybody off here, but I gotta say what I gotta say. They tend to do more what I would consider to be a book report. And if you make it to the end of this live stream, or if you look down in the other videos, you're going to see a video called How to Review Like a Boss, or How to Write a Review Like a Boss. I studied dramatic writing in graduate school. And one of the things that we had to study was how to actually write a review, how to critique things, for the idea of eventually, in the face of all other adversity, maybe be a critic for a newspaper or something of that nature. And there's a very sort of specific way that the real pros go about writing a review. And opinion has very little to do with how one writes a review. And I'm not gonna rehash the whole video. There's a video on that on my channel, which is not yappy like a live stream. It's a actual edited video with a little presentation about how to go about writing a reel or a review the way that the professionals do. So a lot of what we see on YouTube and booktubing is people kind of giving it a book report and telling you whether they liked it or not, and if they did, why. And those are kind of very different things between, I love this book. I love the Dresden Files. I absolutely love the Dresden Files. I like every book in the Dresden Files. I like some of them better than others. And I have my reasons why, but that's not why I would tell you to read it or not read it. I would tell you to read it because of the criteria that I would review something and say that if you're watching this channel, if you like fantasy, if you like urban fantasy, and by urban fantasy I mean fantastical elements in an urban or city setting. And actually Pat Rothfuss, I don't remember if he was discussing it in a channel or if he wrote it in a sort of an op-ed. I don't remember exactly, and I apologize for that. But he talked about how the inner city has sort of become the modern equivalent of the dark forest in fairy tales. And if I'm giving Pat credit, and it was really Jim who said it, it still holds true. The inner city, the cityscape, has kind of become the equivalent of the dark forest. We've got skyscrapers, which are, the equivalent to overwhelming forests or trees. We've got bridges. We've got alleys, which are like bridges, and sort of alleyways, kind of like dark trails in a confined sort of space. We've got all the elements that we used to have in fairy tales of the scary forest, the supernatural, the unknown. All of that kind of exists in the city at night as well. So take the city, take modern times, and then add on top of that the element of magic and the supernatural or the paranormal. Wizards in Chicago, fallen angels, dealing with their increased humanity in the desert of Las Vegas. Druids living in Arizona, dealing with vampires or werewolves who are lawyers. And of course, in that context, I'm talking about the Iron Druid series. Benedict Jacka in the Alex Verus series, which actually in the first book kind of gives a shout out to Harry Dresden. But Alex Verus series, where you've got this whole wizarding world that exists underneath London. And yes, Harry Potter does that too, but it's not the same. When you're dealing with adult fiction and you're dealing with adult themes, it's not the same as the sort of standard YA concept of first year at wizarding school, second year at wizarding school. I mean, we've sort of fallen into, well, we haven't fallen into it. It is a standard trope of, your first book in YA Your character finds out they have powers. Your second book, they learn how to use those powers. Your third book, they take on the evil that has been, sort of threatening all along. These things are tropey, and they're commonalities that you see in a lot of series. And you see them in those series because they work. When you're looking at like YA and you have the gathering of power, I mean, it's the same thing we kind of see in Star Wars, but it existed before Star Wars. So, we learned that we can use the Force, and then Empire Strikes Back, we've learned sort of kind of how to use the Force enough to kind of really get ourselves into trouble and bite off more than we could chew. And then, in the third movie, now we have to come into our own as the next generation of Force users. And there you have A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. So those common themes in terms of story arc in a trilogy about coming of age, that's common, and you'll see it over and over and over again. What really kind of makes things stand out is how they take commonalities that are familiar enough for us to relate to them and then make something new happen. If you watch the video about reviewing, one of the last questions that you should ask as a critic is, was it worth doing, in the sense that did it illuminate something new? And when you show us something that we're familiar with, but make us look at it in a different way, that's when you're kind of a trailblazer. And that is very much what Jim Butcher does. He takes the idea of the wizard and plops him down in a Midwestern metropolis, in a modern world that does not believe in the things that he's dealing with, and he deals with that sort of derision in the way that you would expect that derision to happen. So it rings true to us as we move forward through the Dresden Files. It's a whole lot of stuff, and Harry goes through the hero's journey in a very breathable way, I would say. It's not compacted, it's not rushed, it's breathable, and he gives the characters, all of them that are going to ultimately be important to us, he gives them room to grow. And because they have room to grow, we have room to grow with them, which is a wonderful experience for a reader who loves character and loves stories. And really, just flat out urban fantasy, Jim Butcher does it better than anybody else for a lot of reasons. And one of which is that so often urban fantasy becomes not just about the monster of the week, but about the monster that the protagonist is sleeping with this week, or the species that the protagonist is sleeping with this week. So much urban fantasy ultimately becomes paranormal romance, and there's nothing wrong with paranormal romance. I'm not saying that, but it so often does. And so, you're not going to hear me talk about things that are catchphrases a lot. You're not going to hear me talk much about Mary Sue's or Gary Stu's or any of these sort of McNugget phrases to express larger concepts. You'll hear me talk about a lot of the same things, but you'll hear me talk about them in a different way. For example, when we talk about a Mary Sue or a Gary Stu, and we talk about a character that we're talking about a character who is kind of always right, who is going to defeat anyone that they come across, and is just full on overpowered. I look at it differently. Yes, those are all aspects, but when you really boil that down, we come into the idea of what are the stakes. And that's something that a writer should always have in mind. What are the stakes to the character? Drama, and by drama, I'm not talking about theater. I'm talking about the drama that propels a story. Comes from conflict. Conflict cannot exist if it is not possible for a character to lose and lose big. I was going to say lose bigly because I was going to make fun of the Cheeto, but I'm not. This is not a political channel. The character has got to lose things, and they have to risk losing things, and that's what stakes are. Give you an example. And some of y'all may be familiar with this series of books. Some of y'all may not be. And it's a series of books that if I abandoned it too early, please leave a comment. Tell me I abandoned it too early and I should come back to it, and I will be happy to do so. John Conroe, the God Touched series, right? In this series, we have a young protagonist who is gifted with the ability to kind of exorcise demons like that. Just like, boom, I cast you out, the demon is out. And, you know, it's a blessing and a curse. And yeah, we get that, woe is you. And the character's kind of got problems in terms of interpersonal relationships and in terms of, you know, kind of getting through life. And I don't want to spoil a whole lot. But very early on, it becomes clear that, first of all, we're dealing with a character who, the way that their power grows is not in keeping with the way that the stakes grow. So what I'm saying here is the character gains in power, and it's not just his own power, but his friends and his acquaintances and the people sort of in his tribe. His tribe grows at a far more powerful rate than the challenges grow. And so it seems like no matter what happens, he can't lose. He's not going to lose. He's never going to lose. And I mean, I'm a straight shooter, so I'm just going to put it this way. He very early on gets the girl. The girl is a vampire, and she decides that it's her, and she's a very powerful one, and she decides that it's her job to watch out for him. So on top of his own power, he's got another incredibly powerful character that is protecting him. Then he picks up another sort of powerful entity that's protecting him on top of his own power, to the point where you're like, there are no consequences. This is like, I like goth chicks, dark, wily ways, who are sexy, and kind of the lovable loser guy gets the sexy vampire girl who is committed to him and bound to him forever. And now we kind of have a male version of almost like Twilight. But there are no stakes. And I'm not saying the storyline itself is like Twilight, but there are no stakes. I mean, I read through, I think, the first 3 books, and I'm like, is he ever going to really be at risk of losing anything? And so it just kind of felt, and initially the books, I don't know if they still are self-published, and there are some wonderful things that are self-published, and there are some not so wonderful things, and there are some things that are kind of straddling the fence there. But, you know, I was kind of like, you know, a really solid editor would tell John, dude, they have to be at risk for really losing. It has to be possible for them to really lose Harry never feels that way. It never feels in a Dresden Files novel that he's going to get through it unscathed. I mean, we all know if we've watched Jim Butcher in an interview that nothing seems to delight, sorry, that nothing seems to delight Jim so much as how can he torture Harry? How badly can he torture Harry? And we know that Harry will get back up, but we don't know how changed he will be. There is a reason that about halfway through the planned series of novels, there is a novel called Changes, and it, quite frankly, changes everything. In some ways that seem great, and in some ways that seem holy crap. And in other ways that are very small, but it is a novel about changes. And Harry is changed in every novel of this series. He's changed throughout. The circumstances that he faces, the things that he faces, change him. And at no point do we think Harry's going to get out of it and Harry's going to be great. We always wonder, or at least I always wonder, when I'm reading one of the Dresden Files novels, I'm fairly certain Harry's going to get out of it somehow. But how bad is it going to be? How, not the novel, but Harry's life. How bad is it going to hurt him to survive, to make it through the novel? And how will the change that happens to him in making it through, how is that going to change the rest of the series moving forward? So, I want to keep this one to the hour, and we're getting close to the hour. We will be doing more live streaming. We will also be including more videos that are edited. I like the live streaming because it allows us the possibility of having a conversation, much more than just in the comments. And some things that you can expect. And I want you to know what to expect on this channel, because it's pretty laid out in the intro. We will be doing some actual book reviews. I keep saying I mean me. I will be doing some actual book reviews, book rants like this one, live chats like this one. Will probably happen at least once a week. I will be going through, I've been asked to do some reading of my own work as I go about, recording some of it for audio. So we may actually, you'll get a sneak peek at some of the stuff that I've got in the works moving forward. I've been asked, I have a lot of published poetry out there, so I've been asked to maybe include some of that. It's a lot of stuff. Basically, you can kind of consider this to be an author page on steroids rather than just like a blog. So these live chats will kind of be more bloggy and more conversational. The recorded videos will tend to be more reviewy. There will be writing tips, tricks, talks about writing and the craft of writing. Hopefully we will talk about the things together that we all love. We'll talk about books. We'll talk about writing. We'll talk about movies sometimes. And sometimes all about them all at the same time. So come back, join us with the Inkstade channel when you have time. For right now, though, in this uncertain time in our history, please be safe, be well, and remember, words have power. Words have their own life, so choose them wisely. Have a great night.